I've been watching a fair amount of Pokemon video games at the old Kellett house. And I have noticed the most amazing thing, and I want to know if you have ever seen this. So Pokemon, for those that don't know Pokemon, they're ostensibly like 8 to 12-year-old kids that have a ball that holds a Pokemon in it. They throw the Pokeball into the battle, and then they battle with their Pokeball, or with their Pokemon, right, against one another. Right. But in the background of every Pokemon video game, you see these trainers like striking poses as though they're like in crane pose, or like, no, I'm using Cobra style of Kung Fu. And like, they've all got a different, and they're kind of gently rocking back and forth in their style pose. Like, I'm going to get, and they do nothing, Brad. The people in the background the Pokemon do all the work. Why are they doing any sort of motion at all?
All they're doing, after they say, Pikachu, I choose you, they're out of the story. They are a non-issue at that point going forward.
They could walk to the library for all Pikachu cares. They're not doing shit for Pikachu. Pikachu's doing all the work.
I always wonder. My younger son once was bringing up the ethical quandaries of using a Pikachu or any kind of Pokemon, because does the Pokemon have a choice? Maybe the Pokemon doesn't want to fight that day.
Yeah,
but the trainer says fight. Now you got to fight.
Yeah, and they're coming out there too, they're coming out there with full guns blaring. Like, imagine my fist, Brad, on either side of my face with elbows raised, and they're doing this like. You're doing nothing. If I was a Pokemon master, I would pull like an old college couch out onto the field and like Cheeto dust all over my belly as I'm like, Pikachu, use Thunder Strike. And Pikachu's like, damn it, man, you're just sitting back there on the couch. I don't need to do anything. Meanwhile, the other guy is like, the Pokemon master is up in crane pose, like aiming at me. And I'm like, whatever, dude, I'm just sitting on this couch.
Yeah, Charizard, use your lightning breath, but first, run over, get me a beer over there while you're at it.
Oh my God, that's the best capstone for that. So I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal, Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive, and Sheldon, currently sitting on my Pokemon couch, also having been the co-director of Strip.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We are firmly moving into the spring and summer months, and I'm feeling good about it. I see Brad Geiger's gotten a haircut, so I feel like we're reaching the end of the pandemic. Nature is healing, Brad, with you getting a haircut.
It had gone a good 6 months between haircuts, and I was getting really shaggy, and finally we got to the point, and the boys were the same. The boy, my one boy discovered he likes his hair long, so he's kept it like shoulder length. But we all they got it trim to different degrees. I got it chopped right down because I'm like, this is driving me crazy. You
look like a sharp tack right now. This is because you were about a week away from buying an old Volkswagen Vanagon and following the dead around the United States. You're like, hey man, the comic lab's been fun, brother, but I gotta go follow the dead. So we're gonna follow. They're appearing in Toledo next week.
Yeah, it was getting ridiculous. And now the nice thing when it's tight like this on the side, I've got that Reed Richards hair that I always wanted when I was a kid.
Brad, they're casting for Fantastic Four right now. I got to tell you should put yourself in for Reed Richards. This is a great look.
Yeah. I'd be a great Reed Richards. Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine the Thing standing at 10 feet tall, and then right on screen next to him is Brad Geiger going, let's go be fantastic.
I'd be off to the side like a Pokemon trainer, giving them lectures. Now listen, Thing, you forgot Geiger's Law of Superheroics number 1.
Well, if you got the powers of Mr. Fantastic, I know exactly what you would stretch. That's ridiculous.
Oh my God, I'd be insufferable. I'd be leaving it lying around in the china closet.
You're in the living room. It's in the kitchen.
What's this again, Brad? For crying out loud!
Brad, pick up after yourself. Oh God, sorry. Hold on, I'll get that.
My wife would be the Invisible Woman, but it would be out of embarrassment.
No, just so you would never find her. That's why she would. That's the most effective technique she could ever use. I'm just going invisible.
I'm just going invisible. That's it. He can't embarrass me if he can't find me.
She calls them invisible Saturdays. That's what she's like. I'm just taking a day off. Well, Brad, while you were not feeling well this week, I got the chance to do something we've never done before, which is I did a solo interview, and I'm excited to share it with you because we were both excited for this one. This was with Nick Seluk of the Awkward Yeti and Heart and Brain. Now, Nick, I really wanted to talk to him because he's done, frankly, an incredible amount of work over the last decade, and it's really been burgeoning in a wonderful way. He's done 3 kids' books. He's got amazing merch and a whole merch operation over at the Awkward Yeti store, and he's got 2.4 million on Facebook, 1.8 million on Instagram, and so we had a really lovely discussion, and so I'm excited for you to have a listen to it today.
I can't wait to hear it. Push that button and let's hear what happened.
All right, well, I'm really excited to welcome Nick Seluk onto the show. Nick, you hail from Michigan, is that right?
That's right, near Detroit.
Near Detroit. So you are currently experiencing the joys of spring, I imagine.
Oh, it's beautiful out.
Being in Southern California, I don't really get that change of seasons, so I'm always envious of because I remember having lived in Indiana for a while. It's kind of joy-filled to get that month where you're like, you know what? Shorts might be an option in my near future. I can see a light at the end of the tunnel for this.
Yeah, you poor thing. You have good weather all the time.
I didn't mean to make it that angle.
We have the novelty of the weather change.
That's right.
It is kind of nice. So you go into this dark depression for months, and then you get to come out of it, and it's like a new beginning every year.
Yeah. Well, it's a shame my cohort Brad couldn't be here today because he is from Bad Axe, Michigan, which is up on the thumb of Michigan. And whenever he describes Bad Axe, Michigan, to me, it sounds like the most delightfully podunk town I can imagine. I don't know if you've ever been up towards the thumb there.
I've been there.
It sounds like there's 5 people and a cow whenever he describes Bad Axe.
My dad owns property just north of there on the lake. And so we drive through
Michigan, everybody knows Bad Axe. That's amazing.
I drive through it anytime I go to his place.
And did you get to meet the one cow? Was that exciting for you that you met the Bad Axe cow?
I met the Bad Axe cow. We had a good time. We talked shop. Talked milk.
So you and I have never met before, so I'm actually kind of excited to talk to you because we can sort of start fresh like we would if we met at a Comic-Con. How did you first come to love comics? Like, what is your earliest memories of like, oh dang, these are really fun. I kind of want to do this.
Oh man, it started right away. As soon as I could understand what a comic was, I was really into cartooning. My grandpa was a cartoonist. He died when I was 5, so I never really got that crossover where I got to talk about it with him, but I always saw his panels. He did cartoons for his Navy ship and for like the Board of Education, and he would just do stuff for his friends, and that was the really funny stuff, for his family and friends. But I was reading the comics every day. Before I could read, my dad would read them to me, and then I always read them every single day in the newspapers. So of course, I'm into Calvin and Hobbes and The Far Side, and all the basics, and they're still my major influences.
Yeah. And then when you first started, were you was it on like all of us? It was lined paper with a ruler, and you do your best at 8 years old or 9 years old. Like, do you have any of those remnant comics from when you were a kid?
Oh, I'm sure I have them around, but it was any paper that was blank, anything that was. Like my grandma had these weird papers. They had what was the thing with the holes on the sides, the dot matrix or whatever.
Yeah, I know the printer that would kind of feed it through, right?
Yeah. Any paper that was blank, I would draw on it. Now, I would say by the time I got to high school, I was just taking computer printer paper, and that was all I drew on. I never, no Bristol board or anything good or professional. I never really got good at art. I just loved cartooning. And even when I took art classes, they'd say like, "Oh, do this in the style of Van Gogh," and for me, it would just be a cartoon. And I think I couldn't.
Oh my God, I had the same thing in college. I took 2 painting classes, and they're like, "All right, so paint this vase," and mine would end up looking like it was some version of something that Bill Keane had drawn. It was like it was not a painting per se; it was a painting of a comic.
Yeah.
I'm like you in that regard. So when you got to high school and college, did you do school papers? Did you do school magazines? Did you do anything like that, or how did it translate into your high school college years?
Well, when I got to college, I had basically thought I can't go into cartooning. It's just not a viable option. But I did create a syndicate package, like the 24 strips, and I had something.
Right.
I did submit it, and I tried to get it in the college newspaper, but somebody else was already doing the comic for it. And actually, he's pretty well known, Jay Foskett. I don't know if you know him, but he's he's fairly successful in what he does now. But I couldn't get my spot in the newspaper because he already had the one spot.
Jay, man, that is cold, keeping you out with the one. What does Jay do now? I'm not familiar with Jay's work.
He does a lot of different things. He's got some original stuff, and I think he's a good illustrator. I see him at Comic Cons a lot.
Yeah, okay.
And he was really good. His college comic was much better than what I would have done. So
Yeah, I know what you mean. But I also had a Jay in front of me in college, where Jay Hostler, who now does science comic strips, and he was infinitely better in my mind. He was infinitely better than I was in college, and so I was kind of okay with it. But what was great was, for me as a junior class person, it was nice to have an upper class person to sort of occasionally talk to and ask, like, hey, can I just get one tiny bit of advice? How do you draw this? And so that was really handy for me in college.
Did you get into comics right then? Like right in college?
In college, when Jay, thankfully that I actually was able to talk the editor in like freeing up another spot. I don't know what, as though a college paper, like it's so pristine that, it add another 3 inches, you have another comic strip.
Right.
Anyway, I was able to talk the editor into it and got the spot. And Jay, to his credit, was incredibly helpful. I think he saw it as sort of his paying it forward thing, to sort of help the younger cartoonist.
That's great.
Which was nice. Yeah. So anyway, so jumping ahead, so you create the syndicate packet of 24. That I'm assuming that didn't click for that submission. Is that right?
I'm trying to remember. No, it was rejected by Andrews McMeel. And it's the only place I submitted because they were doing Kelvin and Hobbes. So that's all I cared about. It's like, it's that or it's nothing. And so naturally I go into get a degree in psychology and advertising. And then I go into graphic design for my work because I figure cartooning is just not going to work for me. So I did that for close to 10 years until I started to rediscover that, like, I would always come back to it. I'm always coming back to the cartoons and drawing comics about our clients and passing them around to my coworkers and stuff like that. And then eventually I started doing these t-shirt contests online, and a lot of them were cartoons. And so I started winning a lot of these, and I thought,
were these the ones where, like, if it wins, we'll print it for that day, kind of a comic
exactly
competition?
Like,
okay, yeah.
Threadless, designed by humans.
Threadless,
Shirt.woot was my thing. I really had just a groove with that site for some reason.
And how did that work? That they gave a cut to whoever won? Is that what it was? I don't remember how that worked.
Yeah, they would give you, like,
I know it still exists, but
they'd give you a specific amount, like $500 or $1,000 for that day, and no matter how much it sold. And then after that day, you would get something like $2 a shirt that's sold over time.
So it could potentially be a little money spinner for a while there, if one of those went.
Yeah, when I was working, I was getting some good extra income just off of those.
That's great.
Yeah, it was pretty good. And that's what made me realize there must be ways to do cartooning that aren't just working for somebody else. There's got to be a way to figure it out myself. And so that's what started sparking my entrepreneurial mind into figuring out how to make it work myself.
So you're with the advertising company, and then how is the first, and you've done some for Threadless, you've done some for Woot. What's the first step where you're like, you know what, I'm going to post this safely, quietly here first? Like, what is that first step for you?
The first step, actually, I had written children's books. I had a 2-year-old, and I want to make something for this beautiful child. And so I write all these children's books and I illustrate them. And I have this character, the Awkward Yeti, that's the star of one of them. And I made a Facebook page to try to promote the book because I'm like, okay, now I have to figure out how do you sell a book? You need people to sell it to. So, okay, I'll make an audience. And so I went on there and I started sharing all my old stuff, my shirt.woot designs and just cartoons I had done throughout the years. Right. And then one day I thought, why don't I just make my own strip here too? Now that I have a few, like 14 people following me and I'm kind of a big deal, I should make my own comic. And so I started doing my own, the Awkward Yeti comic strip. And I've just found, like, it was just the most wonderful feeling to be able to do whatever I want, exactly what I wanted to do. And nobody could stop me. Nobody can tell me you can't be a cartoonist. No syndicate says no. It's like, I'm not getting paid for it, but it was completely up to me what I could make. And so it was like an awesome feeling. I started doing that at the very end of 2012. And then it started taking off probably a year and a half after that.
And I know exactly the joy you feel too. Like for you, it was advertising. For me, it was Mattel toys. But that idea that you were creating for a client or for a project or for a thing where you don't get the final say, you don't get the final, design look, you don't get the final bit of copy.
Yeah.
Someone's always going to fiddle with it. So was part of it just the joy of no, this is mine. It's exactly the way I want to do it, exactly the way I want it to look.
It was absolutely like that was exactly how it was. The graphic design, it's like I thought I was going into this artistic thing where I could still be creative. But then I took a step back one day and I thought, no matter what I do, even if nobody gives me feedback, nobody tells me what's good and what's bad, I still am working within some guidelines for a big brand that has been created by somebody else. And even that was created by a team of people. Like I'm not creating anything. None of this is actually me. And
it's more iterating at that point. Like you're you're doing a slightly different version of a thing that's already existed. Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know. I guess I didn't spot it for years that it really wasn't that creative of a job.
And when you look back on your first Awkward Yetis, do you see a cartoonist who hasn't yet given himself permission to do whatever he wants? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Like, were you at first still limiting, or and then eventually you kind of, the wings kind of spread over time? Or
I still feel like I'm limiting. Even
really?
Now. Yeah, I think.
How so? That's curious.
I think I have just a lot more. I like more dark humor. I do get a little bit dark with my stuff, but I think there's just a lot more darkness I need to get out.
Right. Well, I mean, one thing as an outsider looking in, one of the things you've done really well is you have, I feel like, created a bunch of different outlets for different aspects of your creativity. So we talked only for a brief second about the Awkward Yeti, but you have done a really nice job of being able to emote, I think, different parts of your personality through either your kids' books or the Awkward Yeti or your other projects that are smaller, but I would think still significant to you. And so do you see that maybe the possibility of creating a darker comic might be a route to channeling that out into the world? Or do you see danger in bringing that through the existing properties? Because they're so hope-filled, and so encouraging.
I think I definitely saw danger in it. I think from the very beginning, because I was so familiar with branding, I had already decided from day one, I'm not going to swear. It's not going to get raunchy, and it's going to be all ages friendly, at least. So that was just a decision I knew about, and I never wavered from that. But I started another comic strip called Anomaly Town, where I thought maybe I'll start stretching it more. So I got a little bit weirder, a little bit darker, but it was I still limited myself a little bit, like no swearing or anything, because there was the connection point, and I knew I was going to have children's books, and I knew that I was going to have children eventually into it. And I knew eventually the goal was to have an animated series that would be for kids. So it's like I was being cautious the whole time. So what I found myself doing is trying to get that piece, like the darker outlet, in other writing. So I started writing a novel and a couple screenplays where I can just do anything I want, and I have no intention of doing anything with them or selling them, but I can get those feelings out, that creativity out that is missing in the comics, balance it out, and then I come back to the comics and it's a little bit more of a pure look at it.
Wow. First of all, amazing that you were able to find a channel that you're like, I'm fine that it doesn't even exist in the world. I just needed to get it out. There's something admirable about, I'm just saying this as a professional to another professional, of finding the time to give yourself that gift of working on a project that, you're like, I don't need money from this. I don't need this to become anything. Yeah. This exists purely for my artistic satisfaction. That's cool that you gave yourself permission to do that. That's really cool.
I'm trying to keep that up as much as I can, but I also find that a lot of times I just really want to do something. Like I wanted to make a card game because I saw that Matt Inman had made Exploding Kittens, and I was like, I want to do that too. I think I could make a game and figure out all the mechanics and everything myself. So I got to work on that because I just really wanted to do it, and it seemed like a fun project. But it did well. Like it sold well on Kickstarter. But, that wasn't necessarily, it didn't matter. I enjoyed it so much that it didn't matter if it made money or not. In fact, in the Kickstarter, it was doing so well that I stopped advertising it because I was freaked out. It's like, this is too much. I don't.
I know of what you speak. The insecure artist kicks in. You're like, no, I don't like this success thing. No, stop it. Well, let me jump gears since you brought up the idea of the game. So you more than most, I think, are really adept at managing left brain, right brain, the creativity, but also the entrepreneurial and business side of things. And did you know from early on, you're like, no, I'm going to try as much as possible to own and control my own career? Or was it you got burned a couple of times and you're like, you know what, maybe it's better if Nick handles this than passes this off to a company? Or how did that happen, you know?
I think I don't follow rules very well, and I don't. I think that most people didn't seem to have better insight than I had, and so I just I needed more autonomy. I have trouble finding people who can do things better, but they were directing me, and I don't want to be directed by people who can't do something better than me.
Right. Well, I mean, part of it is like you said, you know what the brand is that you want to put out. You have the skill set for both the writing and the graphic design of it. By the way, your sites are beautifully done with a clarity that's really nice. So that's
Thanks.
totally separate from anything else. But it's really. Did you do those yourself, or did you hire those out with a certain design spec in mind? Or
I hired those out. I'm getting better at having other people do things now.
yeah,
Like the last few years, it's a really necessary thing. I still have trouble finding people who are good at things or care about things enough when you hire them. Really, the people who care the most are doing their own thing, it seems like.
Yeah, Brad and I, my cohort on the show here, one of our constant discussions is when we hire someone, how to find someone who has all the right skill sets, but is willing to pour that love and that passion into your projects, as they would for one of their own. And it's a tricky thing to find and to do it well.
Yeah.
What have been your strategies for hiring that where you want an artist who has by all means bring your passion, your ideas, your skill set in, but yes, we are working on my stuff here. So let's bring that passion and direct it at project A or project B, whatever it is.
Yeah, usually it's not very successful. I did find that I wanted to make a video game, and I started talking to a guy who was interested in making my card game into an app. It was like a couple of years ago, and then I got in touch with him again because I had this idea for a game that was different. It's a heart and brain game where it's more of like a puzzle adventure escape room sort of feel to it. But he was really into it, and he made a game that I really liked and respected that was within that genre. So I thought that was good, but it's a partnership, and that's, I think, the difference between hiring. Like the hire, it's always going to be like, I'm here for the money, where a partnership, you have to be invested in it or it's not going to work.
Right. And so with that one, did you find that the partnership elevated the project overall, but brought you less joy, if that makes sense? Like
Yes.
rather than I was just curious about that.
Yeah,
because I have yet to do something like that, a partnership. Although I guess this podcast is a partnership, but
I did find like the work is good, but I found as soon as he told me something that I should do, I was like, why are you telling me what no, you just crossed the line.
No, I've walked away from bosses. I don't think you understand. Yeah,
you have no idea just how against bosses I am.
You're like, I will nope right out of this whole thing. Do not do that again.
I almost did. I was like so close to terminating the whole thing. I'm like, no, take a deep breath, and like he's just trying to like look at it differently, like he's trying to collaborate and not trying to tell you what to do. And so I was able to avoid closing the whole project. So it's still going.
Well, as your own boss, how do you take me through your average day? How do you structure your day after years now of finding the best patterns? What patterns really work for you in terms of write in the morning, draw in the afternoon, business stuff in the evening, or mix and match, or focus on a single project? What's the strategies that you found that work best for you?
Well, what I found is the more autonomy I got, the more TV I watch, and I'll just kind of sit around. So I had an unproductive couple of years, but I did find for me, I actually needed an outlet of some kind that would not have any creative control outside creative control. So I used to do a comic for Webtoon that was just with my Awkward Yeti character, because at that point, Heart and Brain, my Heart and Brain characters took over the whole thing, and I was really missing Lars the Awkward Yeti. And so I did that strip and they would pay me. So I had some incentive to hit these deadlines, and that made me productive all across the board. And they weren't telling me what to do with the strips. That was an important thing. No editors saying whether or not it passes. And so I did the same thing recently, where I took on a new strip called Olo. It's about like a little alien boy who's
Right.
learning about these humans that he oversees. He's kind of like their god, but he's like a little kid, and he's very innocent. But that has kept me back on track. I'm back on track, and I'm more productive again because I have that one. All I need is the one deadline, but it has to be something I want to do.
Right. So the triggering event, the helpful triggering event, is deadline with money attached, but no creative input on that deadline.
Yeah.
That makes complete sense to me, actually.
Yeah, just the incentive to get it on there, the obligation to get it on there, but being fairly rewarded for that obligation.
Right. For me, I have found that whatever successful strategies that I've built up over the decades to cartoon, on a regular basis, the pandemic, especially the last 3 months, have kind of thrown my personal, not goal making, but my personal, drive and daily deadlines into the ground. And I'm curious, how are you finding it after a year of the pandemic? Are you finding like, I'm finding new strategies, or boy, this really sucks and I wish I had a different way of handling this, or how's it working for you?
It's been really bad, but I was also going through a divorce, so I had all the personal drama.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry about that.
On top of the pandemic. So I think because it was so bad for me during that year, that more recently I'm coming out with some more optimism and feeling like ready to do the work and feeling more productive. And
right.
So I'm kind of like in a better place now, just getting past all that.
I feel like, though, that between a divorce and a pandemic, that's a year where Heart and Brain writes itself, I would imagine, where they're just like, there's an idea.
Yeah.
You're just probably awash in emotion in a year like that. That's got to be.
I'm sure there were a lot of depressing comics in there, but I anytime I have a depressing comic, people feel bad for me. It's like, no, you don't understand. Like if that comic's been made, it means I'm already doing better because I made that. It's great therapy.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because I've the same kind of thing where I've in expressing it, that's actually part of the healing process in a way.
Absolutely.
And so people are coming to me like, "Oh, Dave, it's okay," and I'm like, "No, that was the moment of healing. Like getting that on the page is actually the moment of healing."
Exactly, man. That's exactly right. My brother used to text me anytime I had a sad comic come out. He's like, "You okay, bro?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course. I'm totally fine. I made that comic a week ago. Like maybe at the time just before I wasn't doing great, but I'm fine now."
I know. I always feel like that comic too, like granted the moment of creativity is the healing one, but actually in sharing that one that is sad or depressive from a week or two before is actually my way of paying it forward to someone saying, you're not alone in the moment you're feeling right now.
Exactly.
And so I feel like the energy is being misdirected when it comes back to me. It's like, no, I'm fine now. I'm paying this forward.
Yeah. I totally get that. I see that all the time. I see somebody, she shares a comic about her transition, but she shares it from like a year ago. And so people are very sympathetic in the comments. And it's like, she's like, no, I'm fine. Like that relationship was a year ago.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fine.
So when you see how you've, how and what you've built now between Olo and Heart and Brain and Awkward Yeti and the kids series with Scholastic, which I'm not sure that I mentioned now. So let's talk about that for a second. Actually, let's jump. I was going to talk about broader scope, but let's talk about the kids book. So there's your 3-book deal with Scholastic, which the Sun is kind of a big deal. The Brain is kind of a big deal. And then the upcoming one, the Ocean, is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that came about. Was that wanting a new channel again, like the other projects you had mentioned?
Yeah, it was kind of wanting a new channel. I made the children's books throughout the years for my kids. It was just something I wanted to do for them. And I self-published very small quantities. And then at one point I got a literary agent because I wanted to submit them to Scholastic. And so you have to have an agent to get to Scholastic. So I had her pitch to a couple places, and another place offered me a lot more money, but I went with Scholastic because it's just what I really wanted. My mom was a teacher, and I remember the fairs like this.
Yeah.
That's just where I had to be.
That's sort of the 800-pound gorilla, too. Like, if you want to reach kids where they are, that Scholastic Book Fair, there's nothing like it at a school.
Yeah. Being in the fair was one of the coolest things because everybody's getting the book because they'll just buy whatever. Like kids are so into
Oh
it.
yeah, it's amazing. And I don't know. Have you been to as an author like an ALA, a library conference in
No.
America, in North America? Oh, because it's when you go to one of the librarian conferences and you think like, oh, this will be a quiet affair. First of all, it's gigantic. It's much bigger than you. It's like a Comic-Con size thing. But then you go there and Scholastic as a publisher is like a superstar to these kids librarians. You know,
Oh,
they're
man.
literally like, tearing off shirts, throwing them at Scholastic booths. It's ridiculous. And so, like, as a cartoonist, I was like, what is this library conference? Like, Scholastic is like a champ. But so you sell it, you pitch it to Scholastic. And what was your approach to pitching? Because I know a lot of cartoonists would be interested in how your process worked for that.
Well, I didn't really have to do a whole lot. I had the books already made, and
Oh, so
so
you didn't have to do anything as far as like, this is what the vision will be. It was a fully realized.
I had already done the whole thing, and so I submitted maybe 3 different books through my agent, and they were interested in this particular one about the sun. The sun is kind of a big deal, and but what was interesting is when we got it published, they're like, "Okay, so now we're ready to make the book," and I'm like, "Isn't it already made?" Like, no, 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 no. There
Oh,
were infinite edits.
was it formatting and editing? Is that what it was that they wanted?
It was in a complete redesign, rehashing of the whole thing. It was as though they
Oh, really?
only bought the title, and I suddenly was back at work again. But it's Scholastic, so it was good, and the pay was enough to incentivize me to work on it.
Sure.
And the final product was so much better than anything I would have been able to do on my own. So I definitely appreciate that.
Well, can I ask you specifics about that? Because
Yeah.
I have over the years come to hate working with editors, but I know that a lot of people value the process. And so for you, I'm assuming they said, hey, we want a different aspect ratio. You originally did the book in this ratio. We want it more like this kind of thing, and we want to rework the colors. We want to rework for 4K printing. We want to do this and this. What were the specific notes that you got that you were like, oh, actually, this will make it better?
It was so much more than that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was like the character designs in it. They added so much more information to it, way more than I expected, because I thought this should be fairly simple and quick read kind of thing, and they
Right.
want depth of information. They want side facts. They want facts in the back and a glossary. Like there was just so much extra information. So they beefed this thing up into 3 times what it started off as.
Oh, wow. So they saw it as like, this is a great way to sneak education about the sun and how, 4.5 billion years of it
was
burning
very,
in the sky there.
I think for me, it was more casual nonfiction. And for them, they wanted it to be like classroom tool of some kind, which is cool.
And then for you longer term, did you have takeaways from that process that you've now applied to other things? Or has it been like, that was great compartmentalized knowledge that's great for when I next do a children's book, but not really going to bleed into Heart and Brain or Awkward Yeti or that kind of thing?
I would say it compartmentalizes. I was able to take what I learned from that and do a little bit better job on The Brain is kind of a big deal. The second book in the series. And then the third book that I'm still working on, I feel like it was a better process overall because of the experience, but it's still very much involved on their part.
Yeah. And so jumping back into your average day, how would you say you divide up your time over an 8-hour, 10-hour day?
Let's see. Okay.
Because it could be, by the way, and this is totally valid, 6 hours of staring at a wall trying to think of an idea. That's also fine.
Yeah.
I was just curious what your average, and there's no bad answer here.
Yeah, the other day I woke up early and I watched a movie and TV for a while. I think pandemic has switched up the routine a bit, but what it used to be is I would get up and I'd go to the coffee shop and I'd start writing there.
Yeah.
But now I do everything virtually. So if I deal with my employees over Slack and they basically run my merchandise business.
Mm-hmm.
And so for that, I can be anywhere and just reply to things. I'm basically just answering things, helping to make decisions, working on budget, things like that. That's simple enough. It basically runs itself, which is good. But I like to make a comic in the morning and I'll post it the same day. Like I'll post it right after I make it.
Yeah.
And then
that serotonin hit of getting it right up right away is fantastic. I live for that.
I like that. And so I try to do what's most urgent. And a lot of times that's the business, because we need to pay the employees. So it's like, all right, well, I guess I have to make money this week, and then next week, hopefully, I can get back to my creative projects.
And then for the fulfillment, you is it that also Michigan based, or do you have them somewhere else in the country? Oh, it's also local.
Yeah, so we have a warehouse in Northville, Michigan. It's a small town that I grew up in, and we have a nice warehouse with a loading dock and everything right there in town.
With a loading dock. I don't know why that sounds cool. Just saying you have a loading dock is amazing.
Yeah, it was a really rare find to get that kind of industrial space in this like cute little town with like a little downtown coffee shops and restaurants. So we've got that, and keep all the merchandise there. We do merchandise for a couple other cartoonists as well, but I think it does well.
Yeah, you do. What is it? Stara Scribbles and Foul Language. Is that right?
Yes.
Do I have that right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So now, can I ask you? I wasn't going to talk about this, but our compatriot Jeff Rowland for Topatico decided to handle other cartoonist merch and grew accordingly. For you, I would assume that's a really unique decision of like I not only want to handle my stuff, I'm willing to take on other people's stuff. How did that come about? Because there's literally you and one other person I know in comics that have done that, where they've taken on other people's stuff. Well, no, Spike Trotman too, but you get the idea that there's very few cartoonists that are like willing to do other people's merch.
I found I had gone through so much shit. Like I was scammed by a Chinese company trying to get plushes made, and I
also had that. Yep. So I'm just agreeing with you. Keep going.
I lost I lost money. I signed bad contracts. I made all these mistakes early on. Like when I signed my first book deal, I just signed exactly what they gave me because I'm like, I'll never have an opportunity again in my life. This is the only one ever. And so I made so many mistakes early on because I thought it wouldn't turn into anything. Like this is where I've peaked already. So I thought, if I can do merchandise for other people, they can avoid all of these same mistakes and these investments and, investing in the wrong merchandise and not calculating things properly. Because I see a lot of people that go to Comic-Con with their merchandise and they sell everything and they make $800 and they're like, I made $800. And I'm like, oh, no, you didn't. Like, you poor thing. You just.
Oh, you summer child. You lost 1,000. You don't realize.
Like, they really weren't seeing it that way, and so it's tricky because you have to try to explain that to people as you're managing their merchandise. Like, you only got $20, but it's good. That's positive, so that's a good thing.
Right. And well, kudos to you because I've had that opportunity to take on other people's merch in the past, and it's a form of like what you and I were talking about before, where having worked for bigger corporations, I wanted to step away from my involvement with anyone else's bad decisions. I was like, whatever bad decisions will be made will be my bad decisions, right? Yeah. And so I always wanted to avoid taking on other cartoonist merch because I was like, no, I just want to deal with whatever shitstorm I create, that'll be for me, that kind of thing. So, but I genuine kudos to you because that is a real service to those two cartoonists that you're able to apply your learnings and to their business, which is great.
I try. I feel like we could be doing a better job. And I originally I wanted to take on a lot more, and I had a lot of ideas for building something bigger. But I wanted to also just avoid for them to spend so much time on the business part of things and just be able to create like I'm not able to do all the time, because that's all I want. So if I can't do it for me, maybe I can do it for other people.
Right. Well, that reflects good on your heart that you're willing to pay that forward in that regard. So good on you. Well, let me ask you one or two last things, because I don't want to keep you all day, but I want to ask specifically about Instagram and Facebook, because Brad and I talk a lot on the show about how, as cartoonists, we are very wary of them as platforms, in that that at any point that rug can be pulled out from under you when you don't fully control that audience. Mm-hmm. So as someone who has done phenomenally well on Facebook and Instagram, and for those that don't know, I think it's like 2.4 million and 1.5 or 1.8 million on the other one. Is that right?
That's right.
Just phenomenal, by the way. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Do you ever get nervous about the fact that Facebook and Instagram ultimately control that audience, or can filter that audience with algorithms of what they're going to see from you?
Oh, yeah. And it gets more difficult all the time just to reach your own audience. They started tightening up the algorithms at one point. after I had built significant audiences, and I couldn't believe how few people I could actually reach with.
I know.
If I want to sell something, and even if I pay for it, the reach is hardly anything, and it's just wild to me. So I tried to involve a marketing company recently, and we'll see if that helps, if they can work past the algorithms better. But for me, I definitely fear it to an extent, but I try to diversify what I'm doing so much and do so many different projects that my hope is, if that clamps down to the point where I can't get anything back out of it, that I have enough other things going on.
Yeah.
That I can
Well,
still
I have to say, from an outsider looking in, you have absolutely diversified. I am frankly amazed at and I don't know if this will feel like it to you, but I feel like your output is incredible and prolific, and that you have somehow managed to generate 19 different titles for which you're producing a new comic every 4 hours. That's what it feels like as an outsider looking in. Like, your output is incredible, and maybe it's the benefit of having the team, but your merch output is also fantastic. And it would be remiss to not mention that you have a Patreon that folks can check out absolutely as well, over at Awkward Yeti. Is it the Awkward Yeti, or no? For Patreon, it's the Awkward Yeti.
Yeah.
The reason that tripped me up is because Facebook is Awkward Yeti, and all the other
Facebook's
ones are the
aisle.
Awkward Yeti.
Yeah.
Yeah. But do you? Because one of Brad and I, our philosophies with our cartooning is to have many legs under the table. So if any one leg gets knocked out, you still have I still got T-shirts, I still got books, I still got Patreon. Can you talk for a minute about your philosophy in terms of managing your business as a cartoonist?
Precisely the same thing. It's diversifying to the point that if you were to lose any one stream entirely, that you can still live and have some sort of similar lifestyle to what you have now. So I try to plan it in a way that if merch fell apart, or if Patreon fell apart, or if I never got another book deal or anything like that, can I still survive? And I feel like that's all I'm going for, and it seems to work so far, because sometimes things do. Like, sometimes the store doesn't sell. I'll go like a month where we're getting only a few sales a day, and that can get really difficult.
Right, yeah, the cold sweats kick in at 2 a.m. sometimes. We're like, really? I got to build that store back up again.
Right.
I'm kind of amazed that we have not yet met at a Comic-Con, because it is delightful to see someone who has structured their career, frankly, as similar, without ever having talked to each other before, in terms of philosophy of how we do it. I'm A, super pleased to get the chance to talk to you, but B, happy that you exist, happy that you're making this work in a way that we've never crossed paths before, and it's delightful to see you just absolutely killing it in your cartooning and in your business. So
thanks.
That's neither here nor there. You don't have to. But I just think it's neat to meet someone who has found the same path to the mountain, or at least a similar one, completely on their own, and that you rock, basically. I'm very impressed by what you've been able to build. It's really, really cool.
Oh, thanks a lot, man.
Well, and for those not familiar, I'm gonna read off the cornucopia of links that you can check out Nick's work at. The main one, theawkwardyeti.com. Does that have all 3 or 4 titles on the one Awkward Yeti, or should I mention the other ones as well, as far as individual URLs?
No, I haven't updated that in forever. It's been like months since I even put a comic on there.
Because I always see your stuff on social media, but I should do a better job of going to your site for the reasons we just talked about with Facebook and Instagram. But anyway, theawkwardyeti.com. On Twitter, it's The Awkward Yeti. On Instagram, also The Awkward Yeti. On Facebook, this is the standout, as we talked about. That one's Awkward Yeti. And we can shake our fist at Facebook for keeping the from you. That's, boy. Who owns the on Facebook? Who's the jerk? Who's the jerk that stole that from you?
I might have it, actually.
Do you? Okay.
Early on, I spent so long trying to figure out what it should be, and I knew, like, it needs to be consistent, whatever it is, but I couldn't decide. So that's about it.
Well, as someone who has done a fantastic job of building the brand of your comics across multiple platforms, I got to tell you that if that's the one hiccup, then you have no problem in the world going forward, because it's been a delight to see your comics build and grow and do so awesome. So, genuine thanks, Nick, for coming on and talking today. It was a real pleasure to get to hear, especially never having met. It's a real pleasure to hear how you build your career. So, thank you, man.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Oh man, that was a great interview, Dave. I'm actually a little bit upset over hearing that interview. You did way too good without me.
No, don't feel for a minute that you were anything other than Miss Brad. It would have been 1,000 times better with you. But I'm glad that we were able to get Nick on the show because I've been very much wanting to talk with him about his work and his successes. So I'm really appreciative of Nick coming by. And I wanted to jump in, Brad. We got a little bit of time left. Let's jump in for a couple of questions for the old show here to round us out for the week.
Sure. So we've got one right here from Adina, and Adina writes, what are your thoughts on the faceless character drawing style in comics? I have a weekly Instagram comic that's growing slowly but surely. I'm at 2,200 followers right now after 8 months, but I always wonder whether it would be more successful if I learned to draw faces and communicated more emotion that way. At the moment, I'm trying to do that job through body language, backgrounds, and effects. So Adina's saying, I'm drawing my comics without faces, and I wonder if it would be better if I started drawing faces.
Well, Adina, this is a fun question because we have never gotten this one before. And I've never even thought about this one before. But so let's jump right into it. Is it, I think there's two ways to differentiate this. Is it easier to cartoon with faces and is it better to cartoon with faces? Because both are, they might be parallel answers, but they might also be a little bit different. So I will say this. How wonderful that after 8 months, you've been able to grow it to 2,200 followers. Let's start with that. Yeah. Congratulations. That's amazing. Clearly, it is working on some level. If you've been able to you've basically convinced 2,200 people that this is worth following, this is enjoyable, and this is great. So there is an argument to be made that you're on the right path. You've figured out something unique and wonderful. And frankly, I don't think I've seen this done, aside from maybe some Eastern European comics that were faceless. I have not seen this done before, so kudos to you for that. Okay, now the flip side is I think it is harder, inarguably harder to communicate the range of human emotions without the best emoter that we have, which is this myriad, 200, 300 muscles around our skull that can create emotion. Brad, what do you think?
I think Adina knows what the answer is. She just wants us to hear. She just wants to hear us say it. She knows what the answer is. She could obviously be doing a better job if she drew faces. And faces are not that difficult to draw. Think about this. We as human beings are trained. We're genetically trained to find faces everywhere we look. That's why when we look at an electrical outlet, we see a face. Right? We see those two dots and then the one in the middle, and we give that electrical outlet almost a personality as it's staring back at us. Oh, Mr. Electrical Outlet, you look surprised.
Right.
And but I'm being serious. We're trained to look for faces. And it doesn't take that much to add a face to a character. You literally, take a look at the minimalist faces on Charles Schultz's work, just as an example. Or Calvin and Hobbes was nothing great shakes going on there. It was a couple of slashes, a little lump for a nose, and a dash for a mouth, and he had a face. But once you add that face to your character, then it becomes something that your readers can interact with and kind of emotionally imprint on. And when that happens, your work is going to be even more powerful. I'm going to take what Dave said and build just one step on it. Dave said, how great that you're having success by doing this. What I'm going to tell you is once you do the full job of comics, including drawing a face, imagine how good you're going to be. Right now, you're doing that well with one arm tied behind your back. Imagine what happens when you untie your own arm and start drawing faces. You're going to be doing fantastic because you're not going to be doing this with one arm tied behind your back.
Right. And I think to echo Brad's point, I also feel like giving yourself the toolbox of the range of human emotions, even if it's purely iconic, which is what we're talking about. We're not saying draw realistically. We're on the great scale of iconicity to realism. We're saying stick on the iconic side of things, right?
Yes.
The two dots and the curvy line for a smiley face is incredibly iconic, but because of the way the human brain is wired, as Brad said, people are going to interpret that as a face, right? In fact, think of even like when you go to a doctor's office and they always have that scale on the wall. It's called a hedonic scale of pain to pleasure, right?
Yep.
And it's usually like 20 faces. And they ask people whom it's either English as a second language or they don't speak English, like point to a face where you feel. So I get a range as a doctor of where you're feeling.
Right.
That simple, super iconic image is all you need to communicate a whole range of a human status. So what I'm getting at is we all know the power of an iconic face. And so, yes, you've been able to move a lot of heavy lifting with just physical images, just physical body language, with props, with environments. But to Brad's point, you have one hand tied behind your back. And I a little bit feel about this, Brad, the way I feel about there's a comic strip, and I can't remember at the moment, that doesn't use words. It's just entirely a pantomime. There's been a couple of them actually over the years.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way about them. Like, great, yes, it works. You've gotten an audience. How fantastic. You've kind of, your shtick is to tie your arm behind your back, right? And it's great that it works. It's great that it's going, but maybe throw some words in there. You don't have to, your shtick doesn't have to be that, look, I can do this dancing backwards and in heels. Just make it easy on yourself, you know?
Well, I agree 100% about that. I absolutely do. But I'm also going to let's build this out a little bit, because having gone through doing webcomics.com, for example, for 10 years, I've seen this thing come up quite a bit. And that is, you'll see somebody, well, not necessarily faces, but building out. I've seen people who draw characters that have hands but no arms, and feet but no legs.
Yes, because it's always the shtick, right? Isn't that the thing? Like, that's the shtick. Is like,
and if you ask them what, or they'll do hands but no fingers. They'll have like mittens for hands,
right?
Because they're not going to draw the hand. They're just going to draw mittens. And when you ask them, when you ask them, hey, why are you doing this? Why are you drawing hands without fingers and arms with, hands without arms, blah, blah. Why are you doing this? They'll give you a whole long convoluted reasoning about why they're doing it. It's very, very detailed and very complex. And I always say the same thing. If you put the same amount of work learning how to draw a fucking arm as you just put into that explanation, you'd be an incredible cartoonist. Just draw the arms. Just learn how to draw a hand. I know it. Listen, I know it's intimidating. I've been intimidated by a hand. And there's a lot of things about all this that there's going to be a learning curve, but by avoiding it, you never address it, right? And so that's why I said at the beginning, Adina knows the answer. She knows she's avoiding drawing the face. And she knows that perhaps, and I don't want to put words into her head, but perhaps it's a fear-based decision. I'm scared of doing it, right? I don't know whether I'll be good if I do it. But by avoiding it, you're never going to get to the next phase of cartooning, because there's a whole lot more ahead of you than just drawing a face, and you're not going to get there until you complete this phase of your development.
Boy, that was really well put. Can I?
Yeah.
Because I want to try to I really like the way you said that. Can I try to simplify that even more and see if this is helpful? It starts with inability and then gets the facade of a shtick
Yep.
And then becomes fear because you don't want to try to have to restart with the shtick and the inability, right? So it starts with like, I'm not good with drawing noses. And then it becomes the shtick is a year or two later, well, that's my style. I don't draw noses, right? And so that's my shtick. And then it becomes fear on top of the shtick and the inability because you're like, I can't start over now. I can't suddenly introduce weird noses, right? And so that's what people start facing when they go into this for too long.
Worse yet, they buy into their own shtick, and then they say, I can't start drawing noses now. I'm the not draw nose guy.
Right.
I can't start drawing noses. My style is with no noses. Well, come on. Listen, you know you're going to be a more powerful cartoonist when you start adding that face for emotion. You know that deep down. And you know that the first couple ones aren't going to be great, and you're going to have a learning curve. And you've got to allow yourself that learning curve because that's the only way you're going to get to the next phase. And the good news is, I know you can do it and you're going to get great at it over time. And it might just be a short amount of time. You're going to get great at it. You're going to be marvelous. That's the good news. The bad news is there'll be another challenge after that. And you're going to have to go through the whole process all over again, dealing with your fear, addressing it, learning curve, blah, blah. And that's what it means to be an artist. You're going to keep going through this cycle. But that's why it's so important you start here because this is very low level stuff, drawing a face. That's basic stuff. The challenges yet to come are going to be bigger, but you've got the stuff that you're learning right now, addressing that fear, getting over it, getting to that learning curve, attacking this problem, that you're going to learn stuff doing this that's going to be your best ability and your best shield, your best weapon against those problems that are coming up down the road.
And here's to build on this and hopefully leave you with a pep talk like Brad was doing there. You already have a lot of the heavy lifting that other people don't have because you've developed the body language, you've developed your environment. A lot of people, that's the secondary or tertiary thing that they develop years into their comics, right? So you've already got that good. You're ahead on that, right? And then the second thing I want to say is, even with the introduction of a super simplistic human face, a two dots in a line or a kawaii style in terms of a chibi, like those very simple faces with the cheeks that appear a lot in manga, kawaii manga. Even a very basic face will do so much heavy lifting. So it's not like you have to suddenly become Michelangelo. We're not asking that. Like even the introduction of a very basic face to your already great skill set with environments, body language, and coloring and all that sort of stuff. And I think you will find with really simple steps, you can already make great strides.
Now, to wrap this topic up, I'm going to prepare you for something that's going to happen without a doubt. You're going to start drawing faces. And one of those 2,200 followers on Instagram is going to write in and say the following: I like this comic a lot better when it didn't have any faces, right? That is going to happen. I'm just going to prepare you for it because readers hate change, no matter what change. I've told the story 100 times. The first time I went from a black and white comic and I hired a colorist, and the first day I posted my color comic, the first reaction I got, even though it was better, objectively better on any scale, the first comment I got, I liked it a lot better when it's black and white, right? And I made a lot of dumb decisions that amounted to reacting to that. Remember Geiger's law of reader interaction. Never listen to a reader, always listen to your readers. You're going to get that person that reacts badly to change. Maybe a couple of them that are going to say, I liked it a lot better when it didn't have faces. You know objectively that you're going to do better work when you express your full range of emotions as a cartoonist. Don't get tripped up by that. Don't get tripped up listening to one or two people. Now, if all of a sudden you lose all of your 22,000 followers, then you got to listen to your readers and you got to cross that bridge. Chances of that happening are infinitesimally small, but don't get tripped up. Don't get tripped up. You're going to hear it from at least one of them. They're going to say they liked it better when it didn't have faces. You know objectively you're going to be doing better work.
And on that fantastic capstone, I'm going to jump us into our next question, Brad, because I think you put the beautiful finisher on that one. So this question comes in from MK, and it's also a really, we've never had a question like this, and it's also a delightful question. So MK writes, "Hey guys, thank you for the podcast and for the Discord server. I'm still catching up, but seeing people hunkering down and doing their best is such a motivator." That's nice, MK. Thank you for that. Yeah. My question is a further dive down into how your comics career changed during considerable life-changing events. How has the pandemic changed your work priorities? What about parenthood or when you had the supporting day job to keep your art career in momentum? You've talked in the past about how we should remove the stigma of having a day job, but I think we should also accept the fact that an art career is asymmetrical from day to day, year to year, decade to decade. Could you talk about your experience? So, Brad, I can think of 3 or 4 life events for you as a friend that I could point to right now and say, oh, I know this impacted Brad's cartooning. But can you talk for a bit, Brad, about how those moments, how you see those moments, I guess, across a bigger picture now that you look back over 20 years of cartooning and you go, well, there was that 6-month period when the baby came, or there was that 6-month period of transition from a day job to just full-time cartooning, or there was that time that we had to move out of the house, or because we were redoing the house for 6 to 7 months or whatever that was, right? And so in the years that I know you, that's just off the top of my head. I'm sure there are times that you never shared with me. You're like, I broke my arm, or my leg didn't work for a while, or, that time you got even more handsome, whatever it was for you. But talk to me, now that you look back over 20 years, how do you view those moments of incredible life-changing events?
Oh, well, it's hard for me to answer this question because for me, there was one theme that ran throughout. When I had kids, when I had a day job, when I was juggling multiple things like that, there was a time that we were doing things like I had a day job. I was doing Greystone Inn 6 days a week. We were doing the How to Make Webcomics book together. There was times that we were doing an awful lot of stuff at once. For me, the thread that weaves throughout there is that I always judged things on a matter of priorities. There was a certain number of things that always had lead priority in my life. Right. My wife and my kids, right, was a priority. Doing the comic was a priority, and the day job was a priority. And I was lucky enough that when I said, for example, to my wife, doing this comic is a priority, she supported that. Right? She was like, "Yes, I get that," and she did whatever she could as a life partner to make sure that I had time to work on that comic, even during the days when it wasn't my full-time job. And it was more of we're working towards a goal and we're not there yet. And those are the times that it's really difficult to prioritize this thing that may not pan out at any time, right? But she was on my side on that. And when people would ask her at parties, this guy, he spends so much time working on a comic, and her response was always the same thing: it's cheaper than therapy. This is doing. Yeah, she said doing this, makes him a better person all around, and she. I wasn't, but there's another side to that. In other words, playing video games was never a priority. Watching TV shows. I'm just now starting to get into Game of Thrones.
Me, yeah, okay, yeah.
So I, and there's a bunch of TV shows that people would talk about, and I'm like, yeah, geez, it sounds really good, but it was never a priority. And so, because I was willing to focus my priorities on 2 or 3 very important things: family, comics, and day job was the main 3. Once you have narrowed down your priorities, everything else sorts itself out. There were times that I had to, obviously family took the front seat ahead of comics, right? And there were times that I had to ask my wife to understand when there was like a family function or something like that. And I'm like, is this something that I could take a pass on if I could do this other thing? And when it was appropriate, she'd say, yeah, that's not a big deal. Go ahead. I'll give you a perfect example. And this is why I think our relationship works. I hate camping. I can't stand camping. She took me camping one time, like tent. I'll go for a cabin, like when you've got a roof over you. That's fine. But in a tent, lying on the ground and waking up with a spider crawling on your nose, I hate camping. And she took me camping one time, and at the end she said, "Now see, that didn't kill you." And I said, "Yeah, but God, I wished it had." I didn't want to live anymore. It was the worst. She loves camping and the kids love camping. So every now and again, especially when the kids were small, she'd come up to me and she'd say, "Hey, listen, I'm going to take the kids camping this weekend. You stay home and get ahead on the comic and enjoy yourself. We're going to have a great time." And there was no like, we're going to have a good time with that because you're not there. But she's like, "Listen, this isn't something that you like to do. And it's good." There's a lot of different people that kind of looked at us askance, like, "What, you're going on a family event without Brad?" I'm going to tell you right now, if you're a parent, you should have stuff like that where one parent has something that they do with the kids. Like this was something the boys did with their mom. Right. That's a good thing. That's a good memory. That's fantastic. Yeah. There were certain things that I did with the kids without Carolyn, like driving Max to space camp down in Alabama. That was a road trip he still talks about, that we had such a good time doing that. Having a partner on your side that understands that makes it easy. But at the end of the day, you've got to know what your priorities are. Once you know your priorities, almost everything can fall into place and works itself out.
First of all, that was a delightful tour. Thank you for that, because I'm not being facetious. That was really good. I want to say a couple things. One, before I jump into my answer to MK's question, I want to say that it has been one of my longstanding fantasies, and now it's just been killed by your answer. I for real wanted at some point in my life to fly out to Philadelphia, right? I would have shipped a couple hundred boxes of a couple 100 pounds of books ahead of me, right? They would arrive at your place in Philadelphia. I would fly out to Philadelphia, and then you and I, this is honest to God a fantasy that I don't know that I've ever communicated to you. We would rent an RV and drive across the U.S. doing signings across, and then we would come back to L.A. and we would enjoy a margarita at my house, and then you'd fly back home, right? And this has been a legit fantasy of mine to do this with you at some point, maybe when our kids go off to college. And now I know not to even broach this with you because you don't like camping. So
I've got the same fantasy. I've got the same exact, but in an RV, I could do it. Just don't put me out in a tent.
Oh, it's the tent
and sleeping on the ground. I just don't want to sleep on the ground. In an RV where there's a bed in the RV. I'm fine. No, I swear to God, and I know my wife is listening to the show right now and laughing her ass off. And she actually has the same one, but it involves also stopping and doing like digs for dinosaur bones and stuff in Colorado. But
wait, what was that state again? What was that state? Hold on, go back real quick.
Colorado.
Colorado?
Colorado.
It's not Addo, it's Colorado.
Colorado.
Colorado?
Well, maybe we're not going to go there after all.
I love it when you and I take the piss out of pronunciations that the other one catches. Because me having grown up in San Diego, you having grown up in Michigan, there's once in a while an Englishism where you or I catch it. I'm like, Colorado? What did you say? Colorado?
Colorado.
Colorado. No, it's getting weirder the more you say it.
When you told me to say it again, I had to slow down. It's like, okay, I'm not going to let him catch me on this. Colorado.
I just want some input from people that belong to that state. You can tell us how we did on that. All right, keep going.
But I got the same thing. I said, I want to rent an RV. And immediately the first thing, especially the first thing that comes up is, oh my God, how environmentally inappropriate is that because of all the gas you're going to burn and all this other stuff. So immediately it's like you feel that liberal guilt over that. But if I could get past that, renting an RV and driving across the country is is something that I've wanted to do forever.
Well, in good news, once my kids go to college, we stand a good chance that there'll be all electric RVs by that point. So
yeah.
Okay, good. We can keep RVs on my fantasy list, my fantasy to-do list. So we'll do that. And I want to jump back in on MK's question because she had asked, what about parenthood? What about jobs? How did my comics change? And I think, MK, the answer is the older I get, the kinder to myself I get. And I'll tell you what I mean. And I will say this was true of Brad as well, because I knew him in his 20s. Nobody worked harder in comics than Brad and I in our 20s. I would stay up till 2, 3 in the a.m. I know Brad did as well. We worked until our hands hurt, until our eyes were tired. I would do everything in my power to do 7 comics a week, and frankly more, because I was always trying to get ahead. And then my wife and I bought our first house, and this was before kids, and I was house rich, money poor, but I needed to fix up a lot of stuff in the house. So I had to teach myself plumbing. I painted the entire exterior of the house. I painted the entire interior of the house. I did a lot of carpentry work. And all of a sudden my buffer disappeared, right? I had like a 2-month buffer, disappeared.
Yeah.
Then the kids come and without a buffer, I'm doing my best, right? And so part of it was an adjustment in my comics career from the thought that I had to do 7 days a week. That drifted down, especially as we got away from the ad model. And then as more life events started to pile up, I realized that all I could do was all I could do, and that I had established a certain quality. And when I put out a comic, if I did that comic to my personal level of quality, that was all I could do. And by that, I mean, MK, I didn't crap out a comic where the drawing was bad, the writing was bad, just to say that I had a comic. Very early on in my sort of crisis moments of life, I realized, no, better to not do a comic at all. Better to wait a day or two until I have a moment to write and draw something that's to my standards. So then comics started becoming 5 days a week. And now with Sheldon, it's 3 days a week, right? And that's fine. It worked out fine. I realized that I needed to be kinder to myself. Like when I was doing, for example, MK, I did a documentary with Fred Schroeder 4 or 5 years ago. And when we got to the editing phase, it was incredibly intensive. And I was like, I just can't do my comics right now. But how many times in my life am I going to make a feature film? So I'm going to give myself the gift of sleeping at night, and I will work 10 to 12 hours on the feature film during the day. And then, you know what? Drive is not going to be updating for the next 6 months. Sorry, everybody. And everybody at Drive was disappointed by that, but it was all I could do. I said, listen, I want to make this feature film on comics. I'm going to finish this, and then Drive will come back. And it did. And it's kind of a version of This Too Will Pass. I got through the moment, and then established my cycle of production as best I could, and everything was fine for me.
Yeah.
For you, Brad, for something like that, when like say a kid came, how did you adjust your schedule? How did you adjust your output during those first 6 months of a new baby?
Oh, during the first 6, especially during those first 6 months, you got to be kind to yourself. You've just got to say, hey, listen. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and you've got to take it easy on yourself. Listen, life is going to send you a lot of stuff like that, right? And no matter whether it's happy stuff or not so happy stuff,
right?
The thing that you really got to remember, like Dave says, when the babies came, and when we had things that were just, let's face it, a little bit more important than comics. That's when you've got to readjust those priorities I was talking about in the first part, and say, okay, I'm going to be a little bit nicer to myself, and I'm going to, I'm going to take a pass on a little bit of this. It's still going to be there when I get back. And just like Dave's saying to his Drive readers, listen, this is something that's important to me. Those readers got it. They understood it. I'm sure there was 1 or 2 of them that were, kind of, kicked their shoes in the dust and walked away and said, well, doggone it, that's it. But there were more where that came from. and by doing good comics, Dave, let me tell you this. If Dave would have tried to push through and tried to do really do them both at the same time. The comics he would have put out would have been poor in quality, and they would have lost way more readers than taking a pause would have, right?
Yes. And also, I saw Drive as a holistic thing in the sense that I wanted to be just as proud of pages 75 through 95, which I would have produced during that film, as I was of page 1 and of page 400, right? I wanted it to be good all the way through. And so I didn't want to crap out some pages just because I happened to be making a feature film at the time. So my adjustment was, no, this is going to go on pause. I'm going to finish the feature film, and then I will come back to it. And it worked out okay. And to reframe it in MK's question, we talked about removing the stigma of having a day job. I think we can also remove the stigma of there are some times where life events happen, and it is okay to say, I need to change my production schedule. I need to change my output schedule, whatever it is. To say there's been a funeral in the family, and this is more important. There is a baby in the family that's just been born, and that's more important, and that's okay. I think remember that, as Brad always says, this is a marathon, not a sprint. No one will eternally curse you if you miss Tuesday, if you miss all of March because there was a baby. People will understand, and there is enough of a fire hose of content coming at them anyway, where no one will eternally dock you for the fact that you had to adjust temporarily.
Yeah, that's the not so optimistic part of it is that I see this all the time. Somebody makes a tweet on Twitter. Sorry guys, no comic today. I stubbed my toe or whatever. And it's like, I always yell at the computer screen because it's like, if you wouldn't have told me, I wouldn't have known you weren't there. Now I know you're not there and I'm upset you're not there. 9 chances out of 10, if you skip March, maybe a whole month they'd miss you, but a lot of times if you skip a comic here and there, a lot of times, like Dave said, there's such a smorgasbord of stuff coming across their screen, they're not even going to notice you weren't there. And what they are going to notice is when you come back and you deliver a great comic because you're using all your faculties again. You're not distracted by something that's going on in your life, and you come back with a great comic that they're going to see.
And MK, we've talked about it on the show before, but I take a real life lesson from manga masters who we can all point to certain names, but who dropped dead at 52 because of overwork and stress and a heart attack, just a massive coronary event. There's more than a few of them, unfortunately, in manga. And I think that comes from not taking a moment for those life events and never taking a break and never allowing for the fact that, I am seriously sleep deprived at a new baby and I need to slow down my output, or, oh my God, there's been a death in the family and I need to emotionally take a moment and not produce for a bit, And so overworking has incredibly dire consequences. And even aside from health, let's just say creativity. If I have to take a minute to go to a family funeral, A, it's important. B, it's both a sign of respect and emotionally it's necessary for the family. But also, it's good for my creativity sometimes to take a beat and give myself a change up of life events, right? So even if I'm being Machiavellian about it, I go to that wedding or I go to some life event, I come back with 10 ideas, and so it's funny. I should have mentioned wedding, Brad, because you had a point where you're like, my wife knows not to let me or to let me skip out of camping, right? And when you were telling that story, I was thinking about how if it's a third tier cousin, or if it's like a friend of a friend and we get invited to the wedding, my wife, God bless her, to her great credit, goes, you know what? You can skip this one. I'm like, oh, thank God. Because she knows that I just don't like weddings. I'm always like, go with God. I hope you have a happy life. I hate wearing the suit. I hate sitting here for an hour and a half. And she knows she loves weddings. I unfortunately, I just miss that romantic, as you know, I miss that romantic bone in my body. I just don't have it. And so I'm like, hey, when do we get to the meal? That's all I care about. And so thankfully, if it's like a third tier cousin, she's like, you don't know them. You can skip this one. I'm like, oh, thank God. That for me.
Well, and I'm just going to bring this to a close by saying, in terms of a cautionary tale, because if you go back and listen to Webcomics Weekly, Brad and Dave and Scott and Chris, you're going to get a very different type of advice from us at that stage in our lives, because and of course, as I point out, and as you pointed out earlier, it was also a different publishing landscape where you had to do it because of the ad model. But you would have heard us say, you got to get that comic out. You can't take a break. Your readers are counting on you, blah, blah, blah. And the thing about it is that you're hearing a very different type of advice now from a couple of guys 20 years later, because not only are we at a different point in our lives, but we've seen so much around us. Dave brings up the mangaka, right? That like Miyazaki is a great example. My son was telling me a story about how Miyazaki walked out of a showing of a film that his son had done. He didn't like it. So he just walked out. He just stood up and walked right out, right, according to the story that I heard. And that's what that's what two guys that are a little bit older and a little bit more have seen a little bit more life. That's what we can tell you is that, yes, you can do that. You can follow that road where it's not a system of priorities. It's a system of my way or the highway. And this is the thing that's got to be done and everything's got to fall into place. You can choose that. But what happens at the end of that road is you turn into somebody like Miyazaki, who has, had a very poor relationship with his son. In fact, I checked it just before I talked about it, and I guess the movie,
I think it was Earthsea, right? Wasn't it Earthsea the one that his son has done?
I think Earthsea was the one he did, and then Miyazaki kind of realized that he had been a shit, and his movie Ponyo was kind of an apology to his son, as a way of saying, yeah, I kind of screwed up.
Not to add fuel to the fire, but I went on a Miyazaki deep dive for a while where I watched like 15 hours of Miyazaki documentaries, not his films, which I've also watched, but the documentaries. Yeah. And it's interesting how it's one of those kind of don't meet your heroes kind of things where the more I watched him, the less I liked him as a person. I was like, oh, he's kind of an unhappy shit. It's unfortunate. Like
he's downright glum.
For films that bring joy and light and honor and decency to the world. Mm-hmm. He, as a guy, I was like, geez, he's unhappy. He's not great to his son. I was like, I don't know that I like Miyazaki as a person. This is making me sad. And so what I think Brad and I would say is that the career in comics is a marathon, not a sprint. And there are absolutely going to be events that impact your output or impact your production schedule. And that is, in the grand schemes of things, it's okay. As we always say, be kind to yourself in those moments because those moments will pass. And those moments will also be instructive to you as a creator of the arc of human existence and the struggles that we all have. And they will make you a better creator as you go.
Absolutely. And I can't think of a better place to wrap this show up than on that note, because I think that's kind of like a guiding light for comics and life in general. So there's no better place for me to say this. You've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my pal Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And we want to give another shout out and thanks to Nick Seluk. And you can check out Nick's work over at theawkwardyeti.com or on Twitter, The Awkward Yeti, Instagram, The Awkward Yeti as well, or Facebook, Awkward Yeti. And so thanks again, Nick, for coming by. And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that like Brad and Dave doing an RV trip across America. Moving right along. That's how I picture our RV trip, by the way. You and me are Fozzie and Kermit like bouncing as we sing. Coming up on a literal fork in the road. Just the two pals going across America.
With all kinds of cameos from 1980s celebrities. It could be nothing better.
Yeah, that's right. Brad, when was the last time you drove across America?
Oh my goodness. The closest I came was that road trip I took with Max. We drove from Philadelphia to Huntsville, Alabama and back, which was a good sized swing.
That's a good trip from Philly down to Huntsville. Yeah, that's a good. I got to tell you, for those outside of the U.S., I've now driven through all 50 states, right? All 50 states.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And Hawaii was my last one. And I got to say, driving across the U.S. as I have a couple of times, you realize what a big ass country this is. It is gigantic. Yeah. You drive through parts of Texas and you're like, I'm still in Texas and it's a day later, you know?
Yeah, you're still, I've heard from like over the road truck drivers and they'll say the same thing. You just drive and you're still in Texas.
Yeah.
And also, it's also kind of gotten homogenized too. So you see all the same signs for all the same restaurants, all the same hotels. You know, it's very rarely when you see something unique on the side of the road. It's really something to pay attention to because it doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, it's funny how much like newscaster accents in terms of like when we were growing up, you used to hear a little bit more regionalisms. Now everybody a little bit sort of sounds like they all come from Iowa. There's like this neutral Americano accent. You know what I mean? That it's not really north, not really south, not really east, not really west. But so there's that. But also, my favorite part about driving across the U.S. is you'll crest a hill in certain parts of, like, say, eastern Kansas. You'll crest a hill, and then you'll notice a straight line ahead of you, and that straight line goes to Nevada. It never deviates. It's like, nope, here goes the freeway. We're just barreling through the Great Plains, and this line never turns.